Today's episode is brought to you by Sidewalks, keeping all manner of people off the streets since 2000 BC. Hey, I'm Kevin. I'm single and almost all of my friends are married, but that hasn't stopped me from being in their lives. In this podcast, I will talk with these friends and try to prove that, though friendships between married and single people might seem intimidating at first, it's really not that hard. Trust me, if I can do it, you can do it. I have absolutely no vocational qualifications whatsoever. I might be coming at it with a Christian worldview, but I don't work in ministry and I'm not a counselor. What I do have to offer is experience. Over a third of my life spent being what my friends have dubbed a professional third wheel. We're here and we're well fed and we're feeling good here in Jonathan and Liz's kitchen at their kitchen table where we usually eat and hang out and stuff. Seemed kind of fitting.
It does.
How y'all doing?
I'm doing great. I'm excited for this. I've been looking forward to this for a while. Now, my brain does not fire as quickly as Liz's does, so you'll notice she may have more to say.
You talk slow, and I talk really fast.
How long have y'all been married?
We've been married for 3 years. We celebrate our third anniversary on May 18th.
Yeah.
And it's been 3 happy years, but 3 also like very tumultuous years. Circumstances of our lives have been crazy up and down.
Yeah. I tell people COVID and like other circumstances added 2 extra years to our marriage. So I say like 3, but it feels like 5.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of how everybody feels.
Yeah.
I feel like I've been single twice as long as I have too. So particularly through COVID, that was really rough. Oh man. Well, tell me how y'all met.
So I knew of Jonathan in high school. We went to the same youth group. I had been there all my life, and he joined junior year of high school, and he was homeschooled and maybe a bit socially awkward. And
You're going to edit that part out, right?
Right.
yeah. And then fast forward, he went to Stanford University in Birmingham. I went 2 years later, and we knew of each other and would like say hey in passing. I was like, there's that weird guy who wears wolf shirts on Wednesdays because him and his buddies did Wolf Wednesday.
I find it odd that that's what you remember about me from college.
Yes.
Of all the things. I did a lot of weird things, but that's the thing that you remember about me.
Yes.
That
it
might be
is.
a mercy in some ways. I don't know.
That honestly, probably true.
Yeah. And then your senior year, I took you to my sorority's formal because I was like, I had a lot of random dates. I like took people and then I'd see them on campus because it was a setup and I'd be like, oh, do I wave hi at them? Like that was just a setup. We're not really friends. So I was like, oh, I'll take a senior. He's about to leave. I hear he's good at dancing. And then I won't have to see him again. Like, it sounds really mean. And so
She used me.
it was a lot of fun. Then kind of fast forward that summer after he graduated, I was back home in Nashville. He moved back to Nashville. And he added me on Snapchat, which I was like, okay, like, I guess we're friends, like, whatever. He would Snapchat me occasionally, like, for fun.
Sup, girl.
And then he told me, like, hey, if we're ever both in town, because he was traveling for his new job, we should go swing dancing in the park. And I was like, I guess, whatever, we'll just see. And my cousin, who also went to Stanford, and her fiance, who he was living with at the time, they decided we were all going to go together to swing dancing in the park. And then 2 hours before they bailed because they wanted us to get together.
Yeah.
And it was actually 1 hour before. And they told us, Campbell's friend is asking questions about Jesus. And so we really need
Jesus juked. Wow.
Yeah.
we really need to just spend some time with her, talking with her. And then when I was walking out the door to go dance with this girl, I see them come in.
You mean like smoking hot girl? Yeah.
I see them come in and they're like holding Harry Potter and bringing like a frozen pizza. And I'm like, I don't even care. I'm just leaving. This is so frustrating.
Yeah. So we went. He made a lot of awkward eye contact. It was July in Nashville. So it was really humid outside. He was sweating on me. It wasn't a good date. And it wasn't like an official date. It was just like, we're going to hang out. And it was like bad. And so he told me at the end of it, he said, next time I'm back in town, like I'll invite you. We can like get some people. We'll hang out.
I was just being polite.
Yeah. And sure enough, like a week or two later, he texts me and is like, hey, do you want to go swing dancing again? And I'm like, no. But I was at home for the summer and my mom was like, Elizabeth, now if a boy asks you out, you need to give him a second date. You never know.
That's such bad advice.
It's like, yeah. But she has like been obsessed with Jonathan for a while because we all went to the same church and she just thought he was the sweetest guy. But she wasn't totally wrong, but that's beside the point. So I like purposely didn't wear any makeup. I was like, I am not trying for this. I don't care. And then we ended up talking instead of dancing that night and I got to know you better. And that's when I kind of like, was like,
yeah,
maybe there's something there.
I think the date would go better for me too if I didn't dance and we just talked.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, I think it was better for Jonathan. Less eye contact, less sweating on me.
I still sweated profusely, but it wasn't flying everywhere.
And then we kind of started dating.
And then got married eventually. So that's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, dating
we
went
got
well.
there.
We got married. Yeah,
Success.
That was great.
Yeah. Cool.
And while we were dating, I was figuring out how to be a single guy, not in college anymore. Trying to figure out how to live on my own, have friendships on my own, where I was having to put in extra effort and not just running into people on campus. And I think that was super important for me, just developing as a human being. And so, Kevin, that was when you and I met, was
Right.
during those days where we both met at church. I think we met in small group,
I think
right?
that's how we met. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you and Liz were already dating at that point. Then, I think you came to church maybe once that I met you before we started hanging out a ton and you introduced us and everything. And
Yeah.
Yeah, because for those who don't know, Liz and I were dating long distance for all of our relationship. We started dating in 2016. We got married in 2019. And there was one summer in our 2.5, 3 year relationship where you were actually in town.
Yeah.
So the entire time we were long distance. So yeah,
Right.
It was kind of funny. Like no one knew unless I told them that I had a girlfriend the whole
Right.
time.
Nobody believed you. They were like, that guy has a girlfriend. I'm just kidding. No,
well,
he's-
what's funny was like I met Liz like briefly at church, and then there was a night that you came over to hang out, and like she called and she was having a really good time, and so that was fun. But like I think the first time I actually got to like really talk to Liz on any kind of level was we went to have beer because one of our friends was in the band or something, and we kind of got stuck at the end of the table together, and it was super loud. And like we couldn't really talk to anybody else. Like it was just whoever was within earshot. So after that, I felt a lot better. But I was like, hey, I spent the whole night talking to your girlfriend. He's like, really? What'd you think? I was like, she's pretty great. And after that, I felt like we were pretty much friends at that point, and I didn't really ever feel like weird around you again, or like I had to prove anything, which was really cool.
Yeah. It was intimidating going to the beer house and like meeting all of the small group that
At
he's
once.
like had his own. Yeah. Everybody at once. Hello.
Yeah.
I am this not so invisible girlfriend of Jonathan's. But then I think it also was impactful. Like you invited me and Jonathan to like come over for a game night.
Yeah.
It was like way more like relaxed, I felt like, and casual, and like we were playing just dumb games, and like that's just kind of how I feel like games and things like that, whether it be board games or Jackbox or whatever it may be, like really kind of like breaks the ice, makes people feel a little bit less tense,
Yeah.
you know.
No, for sure. It's the difference between dancing and just talking.
Yeah.
Wow.
On both counts, this worked well for Liz just to slow down a little bit. So
Yeah.
well, that's really cool. I think the last thing I remember after that really is we went to a lot of people at our church would go to the Opry Mills Lights show or whatever that they do. It's Christmas lights and everything. And I went, and I don't think you were in town, but me and Jonathan hung out a lot that night. He just basically told me, he's like, hey, I'm about to propose. Like I was like, oh, dude, that's awesome. And he was telling me kind of about his plans, because I think it was still a month or two out at that point before you did.
It was 6 or 7 months.
Really? You
Yeah.
had just made up your mind. I'm like,
I had made up my mind. I don't think I had bought the ring yet, but I knew. Yeah.
wow.
That
Yeah,
you were
so-
going to propose.
I feel like that was when you and I kind of connected on a more emotional level as well.
Yeah.
That was really significant. for me. As
Yeah,
well as
no,
for
I feel like you probably wouldn't have told me that if we hadn't actually been close at that point and kind of gotten there. So that was really cool. But
Yeah.
once y'all got engaged and stuff, like other than like maybe a few random times when you were in town, we didn't really get to hang out a whole lot before you got married because you weren't here, because you got married like right after you graduated, right? So
Yeah, right after grad school.
yeah.
So it was 2 weeks later. And
Right.
we got married.
So we didn't really have a chance to kind of like transition in. It was kind of, oh yeah, I know Liz. I see her every once in a while. And then boom, she's here all the time and y'all are a unit. I'm your single friend coming over to hang out and stuff. But I feel like we still did it pretty well. It wasn't like weird or anything. It was just like, oh, now Liz is here all the time now. And like, we're already going to hang out anyway. And,
Yeah. And I mean, like, I think what was also impactful was like 3 or 4 like of Jonathan's single guy friends at the time came to our engagement party too.
Right.
It was a lot of like people who were a part of my college, a part of like my growing up, a part of his community, and that those guys were so like welcoming into like me being a part of the church. None of our couple friends that were at Emmanuel were there. It was all like single guys.
Yeah, you were there, right?
I
You
was
were there.
Caleb was there. Yeah, a
Caleb's
few other
there.
people.
And so that's like just so special that I remember.
Yeah.
You know, you knew that like this was going to be a time of change, and not all of my friends who were single at the time now like have been able to walk through engagement, marriage, and life now.
Right.
But a lot of the single guys that were there have walked through those seasons with us.
Yeah. Which is good for them, you know?
Yeah.
And I guess me too, yay. But
It's you too, yeah.
but well, that's cool. So how do we hang out now?
How indeed.
Man.
So, I mean, I feel like the way that I honestly can't remember the way that we hung out before COVID, like before 2020. We did not hang out nearly as often as we
That's
do
true,
now.
I guess. Yeah.
But the primary vehicle I would say that we use to hang out is our small group. Like that's our main touch point. It's on Tuesday nights. As often as you can, you come over to our house and we make dinner and we hang out for, an hour, and then we drive together, carpool together over to small group about 20 minutes away. And so we get a little bit of time with you on a 2-on-1 basis, and then we also get time in a larger group setting.
Right. And it's really cool to like have that time to talk on the way home, because things happen at small group and it's kind of cool to like detox and like, process it together and stuff. But we also live very close together, which is kind of why that works. If I'm already in town for work or something, we don't get to do it. But if I'm over here, it's like, hey, I'll just drive 5 minutes to their house and we'll eat together and go together and save gas and all that. So it kind of works out pretty cool.
Yeah.
But
It started in this like COVID ritual because we
Right.
moved to our first place that we were at a month before COVID started.
that's right.
And we were a couple minutes down the road from our small group leaders.
And where I worked.
And
yeah.
where you worked. So it was like, okay, well, Kevin doesn't need to go home. Like, let's just have him come over. And so then it kind of created this ritual. And especially in COVID, we still needed people to be around, even though we were locked down. It kind of became this like family. Like we saw each other more than we saw our like family or talked to our family
Right.
sometimes.
Yeah.
And so with that, it kind of like created these new rhythms of life. And it's like, well, Kevin comes over on Tuesdays. That's just like a part of our rhythm. And like, I wouldn't have it any other way. And then when we moved out to Bellevue and we were closer to you, there's been other times we've been able to connect throughout the week if you have like a cancellation almost in your schedule. But the nights, sometimes you're like, oh, I'm at work, I can't come out to Bellevue. I'm like, this Tuesday feels weird. I'm like, where's Kevin? He should be here for dinner.
What you said about family and COVID made a lot of sense to me. And I think I've heard it from a lot of other people, is that like during the lockdown, like everyone kind of had to pick like, okay, these are my people. Like I'm okay with being with these, 6 or 8 people. And I think that created a little additional bond between our small group, especially. But I think also just between the 3 of us, because we kind of had like that deeper bond of, you came over and we would spend time together and
Right.
before and after. So
Yeah, well, like Liz said, like I established it because I had so many other standing plans, because that's when I started actually doing standing plans with couples, was during COVID, because there was really no other way to like make it happen. But that was kind of like, oh shoot, I don't have any other time during the week to make standing plans with you guys, so let's just like do something before small group. And it worked out that I happened to be on that side of town. And then when you moved out here, it's like, okay, well, we can do other things now because it's way less travel time to get here. And
is that okay? When you say standing plans, is that a phrase that you coined? Because I've never heard anyone else say that. And I've started to use that terminology with other people, and other people are like, what do you what is a standing plan?
Yeah, I mean, I just started saying it a couple of years ago, but I don't know if I heard it somewhere else or if I made it up. I probably heard it somewhere else. It sounds too official to be something I
But
made up.
in our generation, that doesn't happen. People don't like to make standing plans because
Yeah.
like then you're like committing to things.
I guess
What
so.
is
You
what is
know?
a standing plan?
Well, I definitely talk about it elsewhere a lot,
Oh, okay.
but no, that's fine. I talk about it in context. It's just having plans every week on the same day at the same time with the same people. So with married people, it's really hard for them to, one, just commit to anything, but two, to have to hop on it's like if we want to see each other once a week, then we essentially have to wait until the week begins and then scramble to get a group text together and then figure out like what night are we going to meet this week, or what time are we going to meet, can we even meet? And if you have a standing plan, then it's kind of a night that you guard from everything else and you just assume that it's open unless we text and say otherwise. So like we don't generally text about hanging out on Tuesday before small group until like Tuesday morning. And I'll be like, hey, are y'all still good to do it tonight? And so it's kind of just assumed that it's going to be something that happens unless, there's a extenuating circumstance or work was rough or whatever.
Yeah.
And so it's just kind of a cool way of being like, we don't have to like burden each other, and more so me burden you guys with having to communicate about that every single week. And it can become a burden if you have to talk about it all the time or constantly plan it out. So having something to guard, in my opinion, is easier than having to scramble to get something together every week. And if it's somebody you actually want to see every week, it's hard to make that work.
And I'll say you have a more vibrant social life for sure than I ever did as a single guy. And I think it's because of those standing plans, because you're guarding time with certain people on certain nights. And quite honestly, like a human being cannot maintain an extremely deep level of relationship with, 100 people.
Right.
And as a single guy, like I really wanted to have like, friendships a mile wide and 1 inch deep. And that's just not a sustainable model. I think that what you've done is really honorable with like going really, really deep with a couple of people. I don't know how many people you have standing plans with, but I would say, it's about a dozen or
It's
less.
about 4 every week. So
Okay.
yeah,
there you go.
Couples, yeah.
Yeah.
But I feel also like I don't dog on my single friends at all. I think there's still a lot of navigating that we're figuring out, even 3 years into marriage, of what does Liz being married look like? And you've done it very well of like, I'm entering into their life and their home, whatever it may be, whatever kind of situation may arise. Whereas I think my other friends, I do love them dearly, but it's like, how do I relate to Liz now that she's married? How do I make plans with her because she's married? I feel like that's probably what goes through their mind. And I don't want to put words in their mouth, but, oh, Liz is probably busy because she has something going on with Jonathan, which is maybe sometimes the case, but also like I want girlfriend time. Like we have to have a relationship with others outside of our marriage or else it's not going to be healthy.
Right.
Like it's part of having a healthy marriage is to have relationships outside of it. Not to like gossip or like talk bad about my husband, but to like for us to be able to like discuss like, how are you doing? Checking in on each other, whether that be married friends of mine or single girls. We need that time. And it's kind of sometimes hard to come by. I'll be honest.
No, it's true. And I mean, standing plans don't work for every single person. Like it just happens to fit my lifestyle a lot better and just where I'm at right now. I know that they won't last forever because circumstances change. People have kids. It becomes a little bit harder sometimes. But for now, it has worked very well for me. It seems to work pretty well for other people. And I think in terms of entering into your lives, as you say, I'm a little more equipped to do that because of the way I grew up and just kind of my particular circumstances. Because my best friend was a pastor's kid growing up, and his parents were a little more strict, and they didn't really want him like coming over all the time to my house. But he also lived right next to the school, so we would just walk to his house after school, or I'd drive him there, and we would just hang out, for a couple hours every afternoon, and I'd go home. And so I was very much used to coming to him all the time. And so I think that's something that's kind of helped me when it comes to married people, because if you're single and a lot of your friends are married, you will have to go to them a lot more. Like they have a lot more to do around the house. I mean, especially if they have kids, they can't leave the house because kids got to go to bed in their own room at a certain period of time. And so it's just one of those things where most of my friends, I trust them enough to tell me if they don't want me around, and I just like, hey, you want me to come over and hang out? And they'll be like, sure. I'm like, I'm just going to show up, and if they don't want me there, they'll tell me. And if not, then we'll just hang out. And that's kind of how it goes. So
Yeah.
Which some of my standing plans, my married friends come to me now, which is really nice. It's a lot of gas money saved, but so I'm always thankful for that too. And you guys are pretty 50-50 on when we go and do things. Like I come here sometimes, but we'll go other places and do things. And you've come over to my place before and hung out too. So it's not like I'm always coming to you, but it's more convenient to come to you, I think, because Jonathan cooks for me. So
Yeah. And you're like, what, 5-10 minutes down the road
right,
now?
yeah, it's super easy. Yeah. But anyway, well, we're going to talk about small group stuff. Obviously, that's kind of why we're here, is because we're in the same small group. But before we do that, because I think you guys are uniquely positioned for this, you still have a lot of single friends. Maybe not for long because they're all getting hitched now, but that's something a lot of my friends don't have. A lot of my friends, all of their friends are married at this point, except for me. So I'm kind of curious, just kind of any thoughts you have on kind of how that dynamic is different, even maybe thinking outside of me for a minute, just to some of your other single friends or married friends. Like, what are some things that you think different or approach different when you hang out with those people? Are there any kind of barriers or anything that you think some of them do particularly well, pluses, minuses to it all?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a shrinking number for sure. There are a couple of ones that are like pretty steady out there. When it comes to my guy friends, I mean, we're down to like, one or two at this point. And I think that they're starting to realize, finally, they can have a standing relationship with both of us individually. And I think that partly comes from having spent a little bit of time individually with Liz. One of my guy friends has actually spent like some one-on-one time with you, because you were planning a surprise party for me and you needed like some input from him. And so you guys got to
even
hang
more
out.
than that, like we like vacationed together because you were in your other friend's wedding.
Oh my gosh. You guys have spent a lot of time together.
We flew in together, drove your car together. We went on all these adventures before the wedding that you were in. And me and him didn't always like get along. He's a stronger personality, which I love him for now. But it kind of was like Joey and Janice from Friends. And so like that whole weekend I called it Joey and Janice's like day of fun. It was forced friendship fun. But unlike Joey and Janice where they still didn't like each other, I feel like that kind of like bonded us together more, which ended up being like really sweet and special. We ended up getting lunch together and we like had like some like heartfelt conversations even about like where he was spiritually and was open to it.
Actually, I didn't even tell you this. He texted me recently and he said, dude, when are you and me and Liz going to hang out again? That was super fun when we last did that. Like, I want to do that again. So like, he's like on board with it.
Yeah.
And I think part of it just comes from having spent some one-on-one time with you. And I think about like what you said when you guys spent a little bit of time at the beer house. I mean, it was probably 30 minutes. Right. It wasn't that long. No. It doesn't take a lot of time to spend one-on-one with someone's like your friend's significant other in order to develop a relationship with them that's appropriate, but is also fun and light and also deep at the same time. Yeah. That can go somewhere.
I will say, I think it's been different on like my single girls side of like balancing like married life, time with Jonathan, and then time with just us, if that makes sense. Some of them can do like a group setting. Like we've had a bunch of people at the house and like that's fine with some of my single girlfriends. But if it was like me and Jonathan and the girls over here, some of them would feel very uncomfortable by that. I can just like pick up on like their body language, their depth of conversation is different. They're more reserved. So I have certain friends, like I am more intentional of doing one-on-one girlfriend time, like outside of the home. And I'll be honest, I don't see them as regularly. I hate that, but it makes it harder on like our scheduling front, or even like you mentioned your guy friend was like, when are we all going to hang out? Sometimes we've divided and conquered with our single friends of like, hey, I'm going to go have a guy's night with my single guy friends and I'm going to have a girl's night with some of my single girlfriends. Yeah. And so we get that intentional time with them, but I feel like that's also missing out on like, man, I haven't seen him in a while, because I feel like some of those recent times we divided and conquered. And I hate that because I didn't know he had shared that.
And there's a certain layer of fun that a couple can have when they're with their single friend and they're together, when they're with their single friends together, that like, you know, Kevin, when you and I are hanging out together, there's just a different vibe. It's still
Yeah.
good, but it's a different vibe than when the three of us are hanging out together.
Right.
You know, I mean, I think C.S. Lewis put it like each friend can bring out a different facet from a single person.
Quoting C.S. Lewis, that's my love language, man.
Hey, bring it in.
No, I was thinking
He
the
like
same
looked
thing.
that up earlier, and he's been saving that nugget this
No,
whole
and
time. I'm just
that's
kidding.
honestly what I was gonna say. That's the exact quote I was gonna say too. Because yeah, it's so true. And like that's what I was saying is that's I think the saddest part about some of your friends being a little less comfortable and maybe not being willing to press into why that is, even because they're never gonna get who you are now as much as they would if
Yeah.
they would hang out with you with Jonathan, because who you are now is married to Jonathan and
It
one
is.
flesh with Jonathan, and you're more yourself when you're with Jonathan than anywhere else.
Totally.
And that's not something you can choose anymore. Like that's just how it is. And so it does make me sad because they won't really know you as fully.
I have one girlfriend who does it really well. I mean, heck, she like fifth wheels very often. Because like one of my other, this is a childhood friend of mine. The other childhood friend is married as well, actually as a kid. And when we're all together, she fifth wheels, or I guess she considers the baby her date sometimes, which is totally fine. I'm jealous a little bit because he's just such a cute baby. But our time together, like she leans in on us as a married couple and is willing to like go that extra mile of like, hey, when are we all going to be together? And I think part of that was proximity. We lived close together for a while, so she would just come over. There's a balance of like, I need one-on-one time with her because I think there's still that different level of vulnerability of like, how are you doing? Like whether that be emotionally, mentally, spiritually, there's only a certain level that you sometimes go when there's maybe a spouse around.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the same reason in small group, you know, you break it with guys and girls sometimes because there's a level of intimacy that you can really only go comfortably with the same gender. So that makes
Yeah.
total sense. Well, thinking about her, since she's so good at it and she seems to be kind of like me in terms of persistence, like I'm curious about how you feel about single people being persistent, trying to hang out, because I know that it's a little bit harder for you guys to kind of get your wits together to be like, we should like, you know, get together and invite so-and-so to do something, whatever. Like it takes a little bit more effort because you have to talk about your combined schedules and all that. Where as me as a single person, I can be like, I kind of feel like hanging out with Jonathan and Liz next week. I'm just going to text them and see if it's an option. And that's a lot easier for me. I get praised for my persistence a lot. I feel like it's a very tight rope that I walk in the sense that like, again, I trust my friends to tell me, but either I go too far and I get annoying and hopefully they just ignore me if I do, or, you know, if I don't, then there's like this sweet spot of like, oh yeah, I had just forgotten and you texted me again. Thank you. That worked out well or whatever.
Yeah.
But how do you feel, especially with some of your other friends? Like, does that exist more with your single friends than your married friends? Or is that just a person to person thing? Are you more thankful when single friends do that for you? I don't know what it looks like on the other side when you're having to communicate that together to figure out.
Yeah, I feel like as a couple, usually we're the ones planning things, especially with other couple friends. And so it's kind of a breath of fresh air to me when a single friend in particular, which is like the least expected person to do something like that, goes out of their way to plan something.
Yeah.
It's a breath of fresh air, but it also is like, you know, it comes with a little bit of a tinge of a weight of responsibility of like, oh, like I need to actually get with my person, compare schedules, you know, have a 2-hour meeting, and then we'll come back with a resolution and some action items, get the ball rolling.
Such a Jonathan thing.
Yes, 2-hour meeting. Let's talk about our emotions and action items.
Well, I think from a single person's perspective too, if you're trying to find ways to be persistent and be efficient at the same time, this is a soapbox I have, but the group text has never let me down. If you put your couple friends in a group and you don't just text the, you know, same gendered friend or the one you're closest to and be like, hey, do y'all want to hang out tonight? It's just amazing because you save the couple the time it takes to have to actually like open another message and text their spouse and ask them about it separately. And you can also watch the conversation go at the same time. Just before I came over here, I was thinking about this as it happened. I texted them about tonight. I was just like, hey, I know we're getting together to do this podcast, but we're going to eat beforehand. Like, what time do you want to get together? I'm coming home a little early. And Liz texted me back and was like, Jonathan's in a meeting, but we'll talk about it. And like, just that is really nice because you could have just not said anything. And if I just text Jonathan, he wouldn't have said anything because he was busy.
Oh, he had me on Do Not Disturb.
Oh, shoot.
So
How did you know that?
did you not know that your phone does this where it's like it has Do Not Disturb?
Yeah, no, it
and
does. I
you
forgot
can
about
send-
that.
Oh.
So you can send one message through the Do Not Disturb. And I wasn't going to send any
To
messages.
notify anyway.
Anyway.
Yeah,
I see.
I did
Okay.
that one just because actually he was at the actual office, like in person for a meeting, which is crazy because
That's
he works
great.
from home.
Yeah.
But I like notified him anyway of like, hey, like when you come home, like give me a call.
Right.
But it was one of those things that I was like, well, at some point we'll figure out what time it's going to work. I also need him to stop by the store. But
Right. I mean, you had a lot of things you need to do,
Yeah.
but yes, that's really helpful for me because one thing that, and this is just a personal thing, but I really struggle when I text somebody and then I just don't hear back at all for like until like the last minute when something's going to happen and I know it's going to happen because I'm like, I don't know if I should just show up. It's kind of weird just to show up when we haven't talked about it again and all that. So like again, when you text a couple, you have a much better chance of hearing back. But even just to be like one person knows the other person can't respond and they just tell you that, and it's so much better than just not hearing anything. Just be like, hey, I hear you. We're going to figure it out. I'll let you know or whatever. And then she texted me back like, half an hour later when she found out. And like even just something like that, as small as that, is just huge advantage of the group text. Like it just kind of lets you know a little more what's going on. And if your married people aren't good at texting anyway, it doubles your chances of getting a response, which is super cool. But
yeah, me and Jonathan are perfect at texting. I have no idea what
y'all
you're
are
talking
better than a lot of my friends.
I don't know about you guys, but I mean, in those group texts, like I usually feel like I have to have some like perfect canned response that I send through that's like well crafted and like all the way thought through. Like I need to look at my schedule first before I send you anything that's like, hey, I'm thinking about it. But the reality is that like you're not judging me for that. You know perfectly well that like people have to think about stuff, and especially in a marriage context, like two people have to think about things and like consider each other's feelings. And
But I think that's also because early on you would like commit to things before checking with me.
I like doing that.
Yeah, like that happened a little bit, and so now I think you're like swung the other way of like on the pendulum of like, wait, I need to make sure I'm not committing. So sometimes you've like texted me personally from a group text and be like, wait, do we have
I feel like
anything?
I check with you on things more than other guys do with their lives. I'm like,
more
hey,
than sometimes I have checked with you.
can I?
And you've
can
gotten
I
mad
commit
about
to?
it.
Yeah, I'm like, hey, like I always check with you about like hanging out with friends on the weekend, and then you just like tell me you're going somewhere, which like it's fine. I would have told you yes anyways, but like,
Well, also you were so much more social that like if I like said like, hey, I want to go do this thing, either you'd be like, oh yeah, let's do it.
or I'd be like, oh yeah, let me go hang out with some of my friends and do something else.
Have fun.
Yeah. Whereas like me, I'm like, oh, actually, no, that was like our planned like date night, or like that was our intentional time together. Anyway.
Well, that's all good stuff. Let's talk about small groups because that's kind of how we met, and that's kind of where we live these days and where we spend most time together, I think. But just a little plug about small groups. Every church does them differently. They can look a million ways in terms of leadership, in terms of composition, whether there are kids there, whether it's single people, married people, all ethnicities. It's a great thing. It's a really kind of a microcosm of the church, just a lot of them in an individual church. It's just a great place because it's one of those places where you're safe because you all have Jesus in common to kind of just fill each other out. And I think honestly, like when I hopped into one, I tried to choose one with people who were in a different place of life than I was, because I'm like, I need this first of all, but I'm also in a place where I can do this and I'm secure enough to do this. I don't need people like me. I need to actually press into people who are less like me. And this is the safest place I can think to do it, the most intentional place. And, I don't think people think of small groups that way. I think they think of them as like a social club or a place to go hang out with other single people or other married people, depending on their place of life. And I think it's been really helpful for me to see how other people live. And again, same thing with being a single person with married people. Like I get to see what marriage is before I'm married, and it kind of humbles me and keeps me from idolizing it in a way. But I get to see where other people are in other places of life down the road, so I don't waste all of my time now looking forward to 10 years from now when I'm a different age, because I see those people living and their lives are still hard too. And, they're still just people. But yeah, I highly recommend if you ever are looking for a small group to try to get into one where people are not exactly like you, or if you get into one, you stumble into one and notice that nobody in the room is like you, maybe give it a chance before you run away. Because it's every bone in my body wanted to run away the first time I went into. But yeah, it's a great place to overcome your stereotypes. I think it's something that Christianity has that you don't get anywhere else because we have Jesus in common, and that's the reason you stay. I think that's one of the reasons Christ commanded us to be in community, because it's the only way that we get over, I think, so much of bigotry is just unfamiliarity and just not being around a culture enough that you don't understand it, and so you kind of naturally just fear it or are wary of it. But yeah.
Can I add to that point?
Yeah, absolutely.
I will say it was so interesting. I was with college friends over the weekend, and what was so interesting is we were talking about community and hearing how each of their churches do small groups is so different than ours. Like they do ones singles or young professionals, recently married or about to be married. Like they had all of these groups. And this was multiple people were telling me this. And when I like brought forth like, oh, this is what our community looks like. This is our small group. It seemed like a foreign concept. And I was like, I hate that. The church I grew up at was like a similar model to this. People from all different like, demographics, single, married, kids are out of the home or they have kids and that's their walk of life. But we were all in community together growing up. And that's how it was here. However, right out of college, when I joined the small group, I was so apprehensive. I was like, they are all so much older than me and some of them have kids. And I was like, how can I relate to any of these people? And that is the opposite of what I should have felt because it's true. We have that one thing in common, which is Jesus. And I questioned God in that. And we ended up even thinking like, okay, maybe we need to be in a different small group. And COVID hit right as we were like thinking like, maybe we go look somewhere else.
Thank you, COVID.
No, truly, I'm thankful because God was like, no, I am asking you not to move away from this. I need you to lean into this. And God blessed me tenfold by this community. That's what made us step up in leadership in our small group was because we had been blessed. We knew we wanted to bless other people, but also we knew that new people who come in would be blessing us as well.
Right. Yeah. So y'all are leaders. We co-lead with another couple in our small group, which is kind of an arrangement we've had just for some redundancy. So all the pressure isn't on you guys to have to plan everything every week. You don't host. The other couple is the one that hosts for the most part, which kind of takes that pressure off of you. So I'd love to just kind of have you sum up kind of what we do in our small group and just kind of, I don't know, maybe even what it looks like a little bit, just because I don't, like you said, it's a foreign concept to a lot of people who even have small groups in their church. So like, what does a small group, like a typical night look for us? Like when we're on season and we're not just going out and hanging out because, we're not doing it or it's the summer or something.
Yeah. I mean, from a high level, what we're focusing on in our small group is Jesus, community, and mission. So we're focusing primarily, number one, on knowing Jesus and making Jesus known to each other, diving into the word together, praying. Then, once we've spent time learning more about Jesus, knowing Jesus, we're going into community, sharing with each other where we are, where we're practicing honesty and vulnerability. We talk a lot about this concept of walking in the light.
Do you want to quote the verse that's based on?
Yeah. So
You do it every week.
So 1 John 1:7, if you walk in the light as he is in the light, you have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, his son, cleanses you from all sin. So what happens when we walk in the light, when we share our burdens and our sins with each other is twofold. Number one, we have fellowship with one another. We grow deeper in community and in emotional connection with one another, which is super important. I can't have a really good relationship with you if I don't have an emotional connection with you, if we haven't gone deeper than just, hey, how are you, on a surface level. But number two, we have a felt sense of forgiveness from our sins. And I don't think that Christians really dive super deep into needing a felt sense of forgiveness from their sins. We talk a lot in heady terms of like, yes, I'm justified from my sins, but I don't really feel forgiven. It's important to feel forgiven. That's important because that's part of living free from your sin, free from your guilt, freed by the grace of God. So confessing your sins to another person enables you to have that felt sense of forgiveness from your sins. It unburdens you. So community, that's the second priority of small group. And then mission. The mission is, doing things outside of small group to serve our community, to serve each other, acts of kindness and love. It's the third priority. It is a priority. It's important, but it comes after community, and it certainly comes after Jesus. Those two things come first. That's a high level. When you get down to the nitty-gritty of it, we say that we get together at 7 p.m. We don't actually start till 7:30 because we spend 30 minutes goofing off, spending time together,
Eating
hanging
food.
out, eating food.
bringing food, talking. We hang out and then we attempt to rein everybody in. That usually takes a while. And then we sit down and we go over the previous Sunday's sermon. And that's kind of the catalyst for discussion and kind of what did we learn? How are we applying this? What are some other thoughts we had that we weren't able to express at service? And then after that is when we go into walking in the light and we do confession and prayer and stuff. And then we do honor time after that.
I will say what's so neat about it is after you confess your sin and you confess what you've been going through that week, the person next to you or anyone in the room turns around and prays for you. They're not giving you self-help advice. They're not going to say, here's how you could make this better in your life, which I think is what our society wants to do right now is here is what you need to do to make yourself better. Self-improvement.
Or condemnation. How dare you?
How dare you think
or
this
even
way?
hey, it's not that bad. You shouldn't feel that bad about that, which is also not always true.
Right.
Exactly. And so we do the opposite. We just go to the Lord and intentionally pray for that person. We also take a time of, not every week, but regularly, honor time where we're honoring the people in the group. We actually did that just this last week. And just to see how beautiful it is for people to be showing up for the other person in ways that I didn't even know our group was doing. But there they go again, being the hands and feet of Jesus. And it's just beautiful to see. And it's that's not in our doing. That we have done nothing as small group leaders to make it that way. That is the Holy Spirit working in the group.
Yeah. That's something our church has just kind of set up as a thing, and we've just been living it out, and it's been really helpful. And so much of it was so foreign to me until I moved here and came to Emmanuel, because we didn't do, one, we weren't honest with each other at my other church. There wasn't set aside time to just actually be honest and pray together. That vulnerability, especially as a dude, is it takes a lot of work. And then the honor time was something that I was even talking to somebody today about. It's so needed. And it seems like Christianity 101, but it isn't. And a lot of people never do it. And it's at the end of the day, the person I can seek the least of Christ in is myself. I need people to tell me if he's there, because sometimes I don't feel like a Christian at all. And when somebody says, hey, I saw Christ work through you when you did this thing this week, or I want to honor you for thinking about this thing that I forgot to think about, and that must have been the Spirit in you or whatever, that keeps you going sometimes, because we all doubt ourselves. We all feel insecure in that way. And like you said, you get edified as somebody sitting there when you hear about somebody else who dropped everything they were doing to go pick somebody up across town or pick their kids up, or whatever it is, and you're I didn't even know that happened. Wow, there's some awesome stuff going on here. Christ is really working through these people over here. I want to be more like that. So it really does sharpen each other to even hear people honor people. And then the thing that I've had the hardest part is it's just as hard to accept honor as it is to give it. To be able to look somebody in the eye who's honoring you and say thank you, and not try to wave it off. It's not a big deal or whatever. It's very hard. I never realized how hard it is to just accept somebody's praise. And at the end of the day, they're praising Christ, right? So just accept it and redirect it and thank God for what he's done in you, essentially. But
yeah, I think it's important to kind of point out the scripture that comes from when we talk about honor time. We're talking about Romans 12:10, which says outdo one another in showing honor, which, our pastors always like to say, this is the only competitive verse in the Bible that they can find that's actually promoting competition among believers, outdo one another in showing honor. And so we're not flattering one another, because if I were to flatter you, that's a selfish act. I'm telling you that you're great just so that you'll like me more. Right. When I'm honoring you, I'm saying I see Christ in you in this way. I see the Holy Spirit working in you. And ultimately, that's what sanctification is it's growing us into beings that are like Christ, that look like Christ. And so our actions will naturally change over time with sanctification. Yeah. And like you said, it's super important to know that, I've had my head stuck in the weeds for so long, and someone finally told me hey, you've actually made some progress.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's Christ. He's working in you.
And I think even just this week, seeing somebody else honor how steadfast of a friend you are, Kevin. It honestly brought tears to my eyes, because I was that's the Kevin that I get to experience each week. And that means somebody else is getting to experience that too. And it was just so beautiful to see that this week. I loved hearing about it.
I mean, what that does for me when I hear people honor someone and I'm like, yes, like I see that too. They're that way to me. Is it convinces me even more because there's so much stuff coming out about people who looked good on the surface, people who've, preached truth for years and not been living it in the shadows. And what it tells me when somebody says something about my friend that I regularly see in my friend is that my friend is the same person no matter where they are.
Yes.
And that means a lot to know that. And that strengthens my trust in the group as a whole when I see that everybody is not changing who they are depending on who they're with. They're just genuinely who I get. And that just, that means a lot to me as well when people do that. And I'm just like, oh, this is the friend I know too. And they're killing it over there too. Like, good for them. That's awesome. And that's trustworthy and that's honorable for sure. So that's a small group. That's kind of how we do things. That's the big stuff we think about it and why it exists. Being leaders, obviously you've had to think about it a lot more than I have. And I know that you've agonized over it just from, the last year of you becoming leaders and just really wanting to do a good job. And because we've had a lot of new people, that's not something we've had until recently after COVID is a lot of new people suddenly. And a lot of people that are in our group now, we've only known them for less than a year. It's kind of insane to think that because we feel very close to them. But when you see new people come through, because I know that you usually get like an email of, hey, so-and-so is signed up to come to your group this week, and you're able to like see their name and, maybe say something to them about where the address is and all that. When you see people walk in the door, how do you approach married people who walk in through a door together versus like a single person who walks through the door alone? Because going to a small group that you've never been to, especially if you're new to town and to church and all of that, is the most intimidating thing in the world. Like you have to find the address, so there's stress there. You finally get there, you get parked, and then you walk in and no one. During COVID, there were masks. So there was a whole other, like, I walked in and I don't have a mask. And you're like, well, we have one for you right here. It's not a big deal. Please don't feel bad about that, But as the seekers, as the people who are kind of in charge of who's there and kind of overseeing all of that, like, how do you approach particularly like married people versus single people when they walk through the door? Is there anything that goes on different in your head?
So I will be honest, I think I thought of it in not a married and single way. We had such an influx between August to December of 2021 that I felt like crowd control. Like say hey to people, try to just like manage meeting people. Like maybe it wasn't that week. I like had an intentional conversation with somebody that was new. I at least said hi to them. I was like, got their name, got maybe what they do, where they're from, maybe how long they've been at Emmanuel. And then maybe it was the week after or 2 weeks later that like they had come back and I had more of an intentional conversation with them. I felt like I was just doing crowd control by the masses of people that were coming in and out of our group. And then this spring, I felt like I was created a different rhythm of like being intentional, especially if like a single girl came in, like I wanted to talk with her. Even like recently we had a single guy and I saw him just for a moment standing by himself. I'm like, well, I'm going to go talk to him. It didn't matter at that point. It was just like, this is somebody who's new. I will say, I feel like I fall, and I think this is something I want to be working on, is I fall more into a rhythm of being a Martha in a leadership capacity. I want to go around. I want to make sure there's enough chairs in the room. I want to make sure there's food for everybody. We hosted Thanksgiving and Christmas, which meant a lot of food. So I'm doing crowd control with food that people are bringing in. But I know that God calls me to be more of like a Mary and like to just go and sit and talk with people. I do that for my living. I go and talk with people. And so I like to be in a different serving capacity. And so I think that's been something I've seen in myself that I need to be working on. But that's, I think, how I've learned in leadership this year.
Well, also, sure, in an unhealthy state, you might over focus on how many chairs are there. However, there is a healthy amount of like making sure that everyone has a seat, and I think that you strike a really good balance. So I see Christ in you in that.
Take it.
I know. I don't do it.
And at the end of the day, too, like you said, like you spend all day talking to people and like carrying their emotional burden. So the fact that you're able to go talk to new people at small group and not at all is actually really great. Because I wouldn't have the energy to do that at the end of the day, and I'm, not doing half of what you're doing. So yeah, I mean that's kind of what I was wondering, because there's intentionality, especially as the leaders that have to go into it when you have new people walk through the door. Like that's kind of, I mean, it should be with all of us, but like as the leaders, especially, like a lot of times Jonathan's is the only name they know by the time they get there because they had a small interaction with him online before he got there. So you're kind of like the only touch point they have with anybody they might already know. So yeah, it's really hard to make people feel at ease immediately unless they're just that tight. But y'all do what you can. And honestly, I've really never noticed anybody on their own in our small group. People are really good at catching them if they are for even a second.
I definitely want to honor like the other people in our small group.
Totally.
Because my MO is to know everyone a little bit. However, I'm not great at like going super deep, especially when we're in that big 7 to 7:30 period where just everyone's having 15 different conversations.
It's very loud. The dog barks sometimes.
It's
babies are crying.
It's overwhelming.
Yes,
it can be. Yeah.
I will add, like, everybody has leadership abilities in our small group. I completely believe that. I trust the members of our group, the people who've been there longer, to fold in the new people.
And that's a great thing to
bring
be able
them
to
in,
do.
to fold them in. I trust them.
Yeah.
I have no doubt that they can do that. And then I see them having conversations and I see like light bulbs go off in a new person. And then our members of our group make that connecting point. Like, oh, they happen to work at the same place and they didn't know it because Vanderbilt's huge and they happen to work at Vanderbilt.
Nashville's a small town. It just looks big. It wants to be big. It's not.
Exactly. And so that's been a beautiful piece to witness.
As a leader, that is such a nice thing to watch.
Oh yeah.
Is watching other people who are not leaders folding other people in and folding new people in, going out of their way, and like knowing that it's not all on my shoulders or all on Liz's shoulders. It's other people are stepping up with responsibility. And I'm sure that no one else really feels like it's that much of a responsibility to have a conversation or make a connection with someone.
That's why we're there.
But it means the world to us.
Yeah.
No, I feel the same way because I recently, just this year, like kind of entrusted two of my close friends to small group who they had bad experiences with small groups to the point where they were actually struggling with our church as a whole because of not being able to like dig in deep with the community. And I was like, guys, you can always come to my small group. I talk about it all the time. I've had nothing but a good experience. And I'm not even the demographic of the majority of people in my small group. Most of them are married and younger than I am. So like you would fit right in terms of that. And I wasn't just as nervous as they were for the first few weeks, just hoping that they got talked to, hoping that they found some connections immediately that, made them want to stay and everything because they had been wounded. And I think they're still healing in some ways, but they've stayed. And, I've seen people be intentional with them and them being intentional with other people. And it's just a great feeling to be able to actually trust people to take care of the people you love when you bring them over. Like I could bring my parents to the small group and I wouldn't worry about how that would go,
And some of our members have brought their parents and I'm obsessed with them. I will be honest, because then I like hear something, they tell me something of like, oh, my mom. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I love her. That's just like the beautiful part. Or like I have a friend moving to Nashville who is leaving kind of that community that I talked about of like a bunch of singles in a small group. And I'm like, hey, I want you to come like experience this. Like, even if you end up at another church, I want you to experience the melting pot of like single, married with kids, the whole like array. So that way you see there's a beauty in this. I want you to have other married friends.
Try it. Yeah. So because this is a singles married people podcast, I kind of want to look at kind of those dynamics in small groups because small groups are, I hadn't really thought about this, but they're one of the few nexus points where single people and married people are almost guaranteed to meet unless they just like some of those churches your friends go to, avoid it. And I think that's because it's a safe place that they naturally would cross paths. I think sometimes people who aren't as good or wouldn't naturally hang out with a married couple if they were single or hang out with single people because they're married are kind of forced to all of a sudden, or maybe realize, oh, this person's really cool. I'd kind of like to have them over, but I don't know how to navigate this because I don't do this a whole lot or whatever. My experience in small group is there's never really been more than like 3 or 4 single people at a time in our small group. Every iteration there's been, and there's been points where I was the only single person in the small group, but I've never felt like a single person in the small group. I've always just felt like I'm just one among many. And I think that's just because, like you were saying, when people come through the door, you don't see them in terms of married and single, you just see them as people. And I wish more people had that, but I don't think they do. And I think even sometimes I don't have that kind of blindness. I see them as, oh, they're together. They're not. A lot of it's because I'm single and I'm looking for someone. So if I see someone like, oh, I see someone and I'm like, oh yeah, they've got a spouse. Well, okay. So it's still a friendship, but that's what it is. And so I don't know, but that is just the way your brain works. But I hear a lot of stories about small groups that single people go to and they do feel very outcast there, or married people go to and there's just tons of single people and they just totally don't relate and they leave or without really giving it a chance, or maybe they do give it a chance and they're just not made to feel welcome. Just kind of seeing what we have and seeing how it's been done really well. What are some reasons that you think maybe some single people would come in and feel like a single person, or what are some things that you can do wrong to make single people feel like single people when there's a lot of married people in a small group?
Well, I think one thing I could think of is that, like, I feel like we've all been around those married couples, whether it's just one couple or a few couples, that they're like all like clingy and they like have to hold hands. They have to be like glued to the other person.
Yeah, like I've been wondering why you've been sitting in my lap this entire time.
Oh my gosh.
Honestly, Kevin, we could use 2 microphones. You didn't have to just bring one.
Oh my gosh. No, that's cool. You're affectionate with your spouse. I do love my spouse. I can be affectionate with him another time. So this is selfishly my time to go hang out with other people. I need the time of small group to be with somebody else. And I would assume that if I walked in as a single and I saw all these couples like glued together and like they were relying on each other for the conversations maybe a little bit, that would be challenging to be like, okay, how do I... Maybe if I wanted that one-on-one conversation with this married woman, like, how do I go have this conversation with this girl? But she's like glued to her husband, and like that would be a little awkward, I would feel like.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think if there's a lack of vulnerability in a room, that can totally be an additional layer of thick ice that has to be broken through in some other way. And honestly, I don't know of any other way to smash through the ice than with a good level of honesty and vulnerability from anyone in the room, particularly from one person within a couple who's just sharing their heart independent of their spouse. I think that honestly has been a big catalyst for folding in anybody, because it just, the atmosphere suddenly changes when someone opens up their heart and says, this is what's really been going on for me this week. Whether it's I hurt someone this week and I don't feel bad about it, but I should, or it's I've been hurt in some ways that are really hard to talk about, but I'm going to let you guys know because I need prayer for it. It could be any number of things. And that just lets anyone in, whether you're married or single. I don't really care.
That's interesting you mentioned that, because we just had our leadership training a couple weeks ago, and for small group leaders, and we talk about a plethora of things. And one one was like, how do you get walking in the light going? Because nobody by nature wants to be vulnerable. And what one leader was talking about was like, oftentimes, I need to be the one to first confess my sin. And I was like, in my mind, I was like, isn't it selfish to be the first one to talk? Like, as a leader, I want other people to talk first. I don't want to be the first one. I want other people to feel like they can go. But then I've realized the last couple of weeks, when we have broken up into men and women, my women aren't exactly wanting to like get started in the confession. And then when I do, whether it's something small that I went through that week or something really hard, somebody else follows a lot quicker than if one person was going to go, and then people are still feeling it out. It's important as a leader to break that ice of vulnerability.
Set the tone. Yeah. And it is so uncomfortable, and it is not fun in the moment, I'll be honest. But I have seen so much fruit being born by that.
Yeah, I think kind of what you're talking about, that helping with single people not feeling as single too is like I said, small groups are a place where you come to break your stereotypes down. And if you walk in thinking that all the married people are perfectly content within themselves and everything, and then they confess how discontented they were that week, or if you're splitting up guys and girls and you're with the dudes or something and you're like, yeah, no, I lusted after other women this week and I hate myself for it or whatever. To me, I mean, the first time I ever heard a guy say that he struggled with lust at the gym and he was married and had 2 kids, I didn't even know you could still lust after you were married. That's how ignorant I was in college. Like that's how rosy of a view I had of marriage. And so that type of stuff gets fixed when you hang out with people who are being vulnerable and are in a different place of life than you are, but especially when you're single and people are married. Or, honestly, sometimes I think it's really good to hear single people confess their problems because you can forget what it was like to be single when you're married sometimes. And sometimes it really kind of helps you assess your own individuality as a married person as well. But yeah, I think the only other thing I could think about with maybe reasons single people might feel not as at home in a small group is sometimes married people are drawn to other married people. It tends to happen with same gender people too. I notice a lot of times, like I can look up and the gender lines have divided the small group and all the girls are in one corner and all the guys are in the other corner. And I love just to go sit with the girls just to see what happens, But
you haven't done that recently. Please come on by.
No, you weren't there. I did it. I did it on
Dang
Sunday.
It.
Yeah.
Can you do it next week? That'd be great.
Kevin, don't talk to my wife.
Right. Yeah. But no, like it kind of, if it's way easier, I think, for married people to hang out with married people and communicate because they have similar places of life. They're dealing with similar things. They might hang out together. And if you walk into a room and all the married people are just talking to each other, you really feel like it's hard to get in on that conversation because you don't come with the same qualifications to that. So that's the only other thing I could really think about is I think a lot of that's more insecurity in the single person's mind. But if you see a lot of clickiness in married people, it can reinforce that before you have a chance to dash it with your vulnerabilities. So
yeah, I like what you said about single people sharing their own issues as a way to bring married people into what it's like to be a single person again. I think that that's really important. I will say, I don't think that single people have a monopoly on loneliness.
Oh, absolutely not.
So I'll be the first
we
married
don't want
person
it
to
either.
say, like,
Yeah.
I'm married and I struggle with loneliness. Like
I'm married and I struggle with loneliness.
It's still
Me
a thing.
today.
I'm at this table and I struggle with loneliness.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's a good thing to enter into a single person's experience of loneliness and to come alongside them as a married person and be like, hey, like, I also struggled with loneliness and like, let's walk through this together. Like we can be lonely together,
Totally.
which is not lonely.
Yeah. No, that's great. And, I always like to reverse this because every relationship, third wheel or 2 people or whatever, like if something goes wrong, it's never just one side that's at fault. The other side has its contributions as well. And I can think of a lot of things that single people can do to themselves to sabotage themselves walking into a small group. I know a lot of single people who they kind of expect everybody to cater to them because they're single. And I think a lot of church literature does that too, where when they talk about singleness in the church, all they do is talk about how the married people should be serving the single people and making them not feel like second-class citizens and da-da-da-da. And that's all good and well because there is a lot of that. Like there are times where I feel overlooked by married people in my church. They're not people I know very well, but I still feel that way. I mean, if I got to know them well, I'm sure it wouldn't be like that anymore. But I think single people are just as responsible for their own outcasting sometimes. We all have those dark nights of the soul where we curse every married couple we see because we're discontent in ourselves. But I think you can rob yourself of your meaningful friendships going into meeting married people if you have that chip on your shoulder when you walk in. And there's a lot of confirmation bias when you walk in going, well, I'm single and all these people are married and they're all happy and content in each other and I'm not and da-da-da. And you walk in and you see people who are really happy because they're together in a small group and they're having a good time and you just read what you want to out of that. And so I think a lot of times when single people come to small groups and they leave very fast and they don't give it a chance, it can be on them. Like it can literally just be them bringing on their own baggage in and not giving anybody a chance to break that down and to prove them wrong. The other thing too is like, some family that I have has been like this, but they just refuse to hang out with married people altogether. And so like, I've known people who've walked into small groups and been like, oh, there's married people here, I'm gone. And I'm just like, what kind of relationship is that? Like, where's that in the Bible? Like people of all sorts of walk of life were coming together, in the early church. And there wasn't any of that type of, segregation or any of that. To me, it's also something you just need to be aware of yourself. If you're having a bad day about that and you still want to go to a small group, maybe just be aware of your own heart before you walk in. Interpret it through, oh, I'm not in the best place tonight. So if I feel these things towards these people, maybe it's me, maybe it's not them.
Yeah.
So if you walk into a small group and you're not feeling complete or whole or satisfied in yourself, which first of all you won't, because Jesus is the only way you're going to feel satisfied at all. But if you're looking to marriage to complete you, then come to a small group where there are married people and stay long enough for you to see that they're not complete either. Being married, marriage does not complete you. That's a lie that you can fall into if you're single, especially for as long as I've been. You get in your own head and you start, believing what the movies tell you, or marriage is the ultimate form of romance, which is also not true. Christ has got that one as well, but it is so helpful to come be around people who are where you want to be, and see that it might not be everything you think. It's still really, really awesome. Like, I've got a lot of married friends. I watch my married friends fight sometimes. I see them go through some really horrible things together. I still very much want to be married. I'm not jaded, but I very much know that it's hard. It's two sinners under one roof, and they're just as lonely as I am sometimes, like you said. So I think it's a very cool place to come kind of sober your mind up a bit.
On all parts too, right? Because I could easily turn around and be like, well, that married couple looks put together. They look like they have all their stuff, all of their everything, all their ish figured out.
That's true.
And they don't. Or they have kids, and that's what I want. And I could be envious of that. Well, you know what? They were up until 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. with projectile vomiting last night. And then I'm humbled.
Right.
Or I know there are married people out there who sometimes envy singleness. I know it's, they don't envy the dating or the finding somebody, but they envy the freedom, the open schedule, the not being tied to somebody, because maybe they've been with that person for a while and they're like, I don't have as much freedom as I used to, right?
Yeah.
They could feel that way, but they could hang out with a single person and be like, wait, that's not all it's cracked up to be. So
Totally.
On all accounts, we could be being vulnerable and also humbling each other in that.
Yeah. Well, I guess the last thing I really want to talk about, since we've kind of gotten through there, is say you're a married couple, because you are, and there's a single person that you meet in group. And I don't know if y'all actually been in this situation yet, because I know a lot of the newer people have been couples, whether they're married or not. But if you meet a single person in the small group and you're like, I really want to get to know that person, like we would like to hang out with that person, is there any way that you would approach that differently than if you met a married couple in the small group and you're like, well, I want to get to know that married couple? Like, if there's not, you can totally say, no, there's no difference in our minds. We would do the same thing, but I'm just curious.
You did just a couple weeks ago.
I did that just a couple of weeks ago. I mean, I think that the difference is like, I would start with like a friendship between the same sex. So like a single guy came to our small group for the first time a couple weeks ago, and like I reached out to him and I was like, hey man, let's get coffee.
Yeah.
Instead of,
me doing that, which would be a little weird.
That'd be a little weird.
Right.
I mean, nothing wrong with like just inviting him over to our house and like both of us hanging out with him. Like nothing wrong with that. But I would like to know that like me and him one-on-one can have a relationship, like a friendship, because it'd be kind of weird if he came over and he just became like best friends with my wife and like I feel kind of like on the outside. That'd be a little weird.
Well, I mean, who wouldn't want to be my best friend?
That's true. At this point, so I mean, Kevin, like, at this point, like you and Liz have your own like friendship.
Yes.
And that's awesome.
Right.
But it was established first with you guys.
It was established first with like the two of us. And so like there's like a level of trust there. Like when you're married, like as a guy, like you need to like protect your wife, right? I mean, you don't want to put her into a situation where she can be vulnerable or anything.
Right.
Not like all single guys are out there to attack your wife or something.
Right.
But I mean, there's just a level of discernment that goes into
world.
that.
Yeah.
And I think on the same level, like if there was a single girl that came in, like I would kind of expect Liz to reach out to her and establish a little bit of a relationship and then fold her into like our married chemistry, which like we would love to do.
Yeah.
And we also do that even with married couples. Like there's a couple that I met with a girl for coffee and you ended up meeting with him for lunch one day instead of having them over. I don't know if we just couldn't align our calendars or what, but I enjoyed it. I love just having coffee with her. What turned into like what we thought would be an hour was like 2 hours later,
Yeah.
Those things happen. And so Even if she was a single, I would go do that.
How weird would that be if like y'all did that, where it's like, okay, I'm going to take the guy out, and you're like, I'll take the girl out. And then you come back and you're like, how was it? It's like, well, she was great. It's like, oh, he was terrible. I don't want to hang out with him again. Like, well, I guess she's just my friend then. And that's all.
I mean, heck, we do have married friends that I'm closer to the like girl dynamic than the married spouse. We've struggled with that before. It's hard to find like a couple friend.
As a couple, it's like the probability is stacked against you that like
I guess that's true.
Everyone's gonna get along together. You know, I mean, like,
fun fact, Kevin, it is challenging to find couple friends.
I hadn't really thought about that, but it is a lot more chemistry has to exist there.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's out there, and it's very special when you find it.
Yeah. Luckily, everybody at our small group, all the couples we like.
Yeah. Well, there is that one.
Yeah. We won't talk about them.
You know
though.
who you are.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's totally been my experience too, though. Like, you know, I had a new couple that, you know, has been there less than, you know, half a year. And the guy, like, after the first small group, like, sent me a message and was like, hey, dude, you want to get pizza or whatever? I'm like, yeah, that sounds great. And we got pizza, and it was a really good time. And literally the same night, he texted me again and was like, hey, so me and my wife want to have you over. Are you good to come over sometime next week? And I was like, I don't know if he knew that he did this. Maybe he did, but he vetted me. That's exactly what he did, is what you're talking about. Is
what you should do.
He thought we would get along. We did get along. He also saw that, because I think especially with dudes, like, I'm sure women are the same way. I don't know. I'm not a woman, but like, there are some things that you might say around a dude that you wouldn't say if there was a woman present. And I think kind of giving the dude a chance to show his true colors first before you bring him into the house with your wife is a smart move. So like, honestly, as a single person, it's a huge honor when you kind of feel like you passed the test in a way. You're like, oh, I'm getting to meet the wife now. Like I must have passed the first test, you know, and I just got to blow it with this. But it shows a bit of trust, but it also kind of removes a bunch of barriers before you even walk into the house, because you've been accepted on some level, which is really kind of cool.
And if you wind up just with another dude friend, like, that's a win too.
Right. Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
If you don't, quote unquote, pass the test.
Yeah, if he doesn't invite you to come meet his wife, that is not a criticism. That is just how, in this particular instance, it happened for me. And I recognized what it was. And I thought it was a really smart way to do it. But yeah, and then on the flip side, as a single person, if I meet a married couple that I want to get to know more, it's really kind of the same thing. Like, you could kind of just do the reverse and just ask the dude out first and like hang out with him and like give him a chance to vet you. Be like, you know, I'm letting you vet me. So maybe I can, like, then later you can initiate, like, hey, I'd love to come over and hang out with the two of you. I'd love to have the two of you over or whatever. You've given him a chance to become comfortable enough with you to make that decision. But personally, my style is I kind of just like to do the group hangout from the start. And again, that's not for everybody, but like, I'm used to it at this point. I'm used to kind of meeting people together. I'm used to having a lot of female friends because a lot of my friends are married. And another one of my spiels, this is a secret that I've learned over years of being single, is you can kind of invite yourself over if you offer to bring food. And again, a lot of times married people need you to come to them. And so you being willing to do that is helpful, but it could kind of seem rude to invite yourself over. So if you say, hey, I'd love to hang out with you guys tonight, I can come to you and pick some food up on the way. Most of the time, nobody ever lets me even pick food up. They're like, no, that sounds great. We're actually going to cook, and we'll just make a little extra. Or, oh, we're eating leftovers tonight. We have plenty for you. Please come over, or whatever. So it kind of works out, and it doesn't come off as rude, I don't think. And that's just something that I was given permission to do by a lot of married friends. It's like, don't feel like you're inviting yourself over. And I'm like, well, if I bring food, then it feels like I'm at least attempting to make an effort to be, you know, contributing to this. And I'm not just coming in and eating your food and staying in your house and all that. But so yeah, if you're worried about that, that is a good thing to try and just see if it works, because it has for me. So, or
you invite people out and you invite them to the best places in town, like McDougal's and Jenny's.
We do love McDougal's, yeah. Well, that's mostly for people who can't get out as much. A lot of people with kids, or, you know, people who don't have the budget to go out or whatever. I've just kind of found that there are a lot of couples, you get into periods of time where, I mean, before small group, it doesn't make sense for us to go out to eat somewhere most of the time just because of time. Yeah. So that's been something where I come to you guys or whatever. But yeah, it depends. I mean, I love it when married couples are just game to go do something. It's cool to get out and do something different and not just be around. But I'm also just down to hang, and wherever that happens is fine. So, well, cool, guys. That's kind of everything I wanted to talk about, unless there's anything else that's kind of just on your mind in terms of small groups and single people and married people.
I guess I was curious. I mean, how much success have you had with asking a married couple to hang out for the first time instead of just going straight to the guy?
I mean, it's almost every single time. I can't really think of a time where they're like, hey, how about we just hang out first or whatever. Maybe they felt pressured. I don't know. But I mean, I usually ask through the guy. A lot of times, like I think the first time I hung out with the Stallings, because they were in my small group at one point and they're not anymore. We kind of have to make more of an effort to see each other now because they live across town. But like, I got to know him a little bit, but I also got to know her. But she wasn't at church one day and he was. So I just said, hey, I'd love to hang out with you guys at some point, whatever that looks like. They had, a kid on the way at that point, and he's like, sure, I'll let her know and we'll get back to you. And then later that week, I think she texted me actually and told me, hey, we'd love to hang out. And pretty high success rate. I think most people, if you initiate things, are flattered and will take you up on it.
I will say, as a married couple, like I don't expect single people to ask me and my wife both to come hang out or ask to come hang out with us. And so it is really I feel very honored when, in the few times that actually does happen, where a single person wants to hang out with not just me, but like both of us as a couple. Like it's unusual and it feels really good. And so I don't think that there would be really, unless the person is just an absolute creep,
right?
That we would like
bring your wife.
Say no.
Yeah.
Your wife should definitely come.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, that'd be weird.
I'm really into your dog.
Oh gosh.
Oh my God.
But no, that's a good point.
There.
Yeah.
But I think there's a place too that we can't believe the lies that run through our head before we initiate something, whether that be as a single of, oh, well, the married people, they're probably busy. Maybe they don't have time. Any of those lies that keep circulating in your head, or the opposite, being married and being like, sometimes I even have lies of like, okay, does that single person want to have a relationship with me? Like I've kind of been burned by some of my single friends who like don't want to also hang out with Jonathan, or they haven't said that outright, but it's been observed through body language or things they've said. And so when that happens, like I get apprehensive and I start running through these lies, and like at some point I need to stop believing what Satan says. And I hope a single person also stops believing what Satan says, because that's keeping us from community.
Yeah.
And that's so important. We all need it, whether you're married or single.
That's really the goal of this podcast, is just to show that a lot of the intimidation factor of trying to be a single person who hangs out with married people, or, married people who are trying to get to know a single person, it is just lies in your head. It's not as hard as it seems to be. And I think we've made it a hard thing just by assuming things and not actually trying. And I mean, you just heard Jonathan say, if you're a single person and you're nervous about getting to know a married couple, they see it as an honor most of the time. If you ask the person who's the same gender to hang out, and then you also say, can we all three hang out, me and you and your spouse? Like, because the highest honor you can really attribute to somebody is caring about the things they care about, especially right off the bat when you don't even know them. And what do they care about more than their spouse? Like they're literally part of them now. So that's kind of the way I've always seen it. I've always kind of seen it as if one of my friends gets married, I don't have a friendship with that person unless their spouse is involved anymore, because it's just one, like, I wouldn't be being a very good friend to that person anymore if I didn't care about the person they care about the most. And again, curated friend, like, why would I turn that down? Like, I'm bound to have something in common with them. So yeah, I don't think it has to be as hard as it is. And I think there's been a lot of good stuff on here about how people can, if they're first timers to this type of relationship and they have a small group offering it up to them, they can just dive right in. Yeah, at the end of every episode, I do like to kind of just give couples a chance to kind of share wisdom from their marriage, because, one of the things that I've done for the last 10 years as my friends have been married is try to pay attention to their marriages and learn from them. And, one, to enjoy where I'm at now and realize that marriage isn't everything, but also to try to be a little wiser if it ever does come, to be able to see warning signs that I might not have seen otherwise, to know, when I'm in the wrong in the future, if I get in a relationship with somebody because I've seen my friends struggle through it or whatever. And, every one of you guys just has such a great relationship in a different way. And I just kind of want to give you a chance to, if there's anything you're particularly thankful for in your own marriage that works surprisingly well, or something that you see your spouse do that you're just like, man, I never thought that I'd have somebody who does that for me, or whatever. I just like to know what goes through your head when you think that.
I mean, one thing I would say that I'm thankful for, and I'll add to it, is counseling. Absolutely. We started going through marriage counseling last July or August. And
we just finished up.
The
current round. We know that
You're
it's
done.
going to
You're perfect now.
We became perfect. We transcended. But honestly, I think that the biggest thing that I learned through marriage counseling is how to connect with my best friend, my wife, through my emotions. because I grew up in a house where I felt like I had to have everything perfect before I expressed it. I felt like I had to have kind of a perfect response to everything before it was expressed and put into words. And so going through counseling and learning kind of like, oh, there's actually a way to express your emotion in a way that lets her in and builds an emotional bond and a connection that is, I would argue, partly the point of the marriage is like to have an emotional bond with a person. I mean, you can say biblically it's to show Christ's relationship with his church. Christ has an emotional bond with his church. We talk a lot about vulnerability and honesty in small groups. It carries over also to your marriage, and not just carries over, but it kind of originates in your marriage in this deepest relationship.
Yeah. I would say I echo all of that. Counseling has been a beautiful time of that. I think in that too, we learned of not to be keeping score too, of like whether that's stuff around the house or whether that's being there for one another, whether I'm needing more emotional support one week or he's needing more emotional support one week. That can be a breeding ground of bitterness and resentment. Instead of, I'm here to support them through whatever season they're in, whether it's the good and the bad. And I feel like that has been a really sweet part of being in counseling, is learning how to rejoice together, how to grieve together, how to emotionally connect together.
Yeah.
So it's been beautiful to watch. It took a lot of work, and I fully anticipate that we are going to go back to counseling again. And our counselor was like, we're an open door. Like, heck, you may go through the summer and you may need to like have a tune up at some point next fall or a year from now or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
I'm around.
Yeah.
And I have done individual, I've done couples now, and it's been so vital to our marriage that we've done this.
I love that. There's been a lot of things that the stigma has kind of gone away in recent times that are really good, that the stigma should go away. It should have never been there to begin with. And counseling and therapy is one of those things that I'm noticing. And I'm like, yes, duh, like you're a finance guy. Like what you're essentially doing with that is investing in the most important relationship in your life. And it pays, as you've just said. Like you need a third party every once in a while to kind of come in and look at what you're doing and help you. Again, the same way that you can get less sober-minded in your own brain all the time when you kind of share a house and you kind of share a life together, you can also kind of become less objective in that, I suppose. So that's been something a lot of my friends have just raved about. And so I'm glad it's worked for you. I know it's something you really believe in. It's part of your career as well.
It is a part of my career.
You've seen it proved time and time again.
It has. And I think what's so important is whether you're an individual as a single or a married person, this is not like, our marriage was not in a crisis situation.
Right.
We were not about to separate or anything, but we were like, hey, we're not connecting right now. We need to build more of an established foundation of a connected emotional relationship in our marriage, even before we ever like have kids in the future. We need to be working on these things, building rhythms of life. As a single, you don't have to go to counseling when you're in crisis, whether you're depressed or feeling isolated from people, or if you're in some sort of crisis. Do that if you are. But that doesn't mean that's when you need to go to counseling. You can go whenever. You could just be feeling a little anxious about something, and this is the time to go invest in yourself, like you were talking about.
Yeah. That's another thing we have a lot of freedom on too. And I feel like sometimes the immediate consequences are not as dire for single people if they don't go, as opposed to married people, because married people, you've got another person there that you're not connecting with and you're spiraling. And so, yeah. Well, that's great. I really appreciate you guys. And one thing that I see in your marriage that I really appreciate is y'all seem to have one of the better balances that I've seen in terms of just really having fun together. Like you enjoy a lot of things together, whether it be TV shows or activities, but you also both have individual and combined social lives that you very much keep up with. And that's a really hard balance to like know when enough time to spend together to like, keep your marriage up and to have time together to fulfill that, but also to have a lot of friends and to see those friends regularly and to pour into those friends and be present when you are there. And I admire that because I know that's a hard line to walk. So I'm encouraged to see where that's going. And as somebody who, you do have the gift of hospitality, Liz, and you have very much as well, more in a culinary sense, I think. But I always feel like this is a place I can just come and no matter what's going on, I can just jump in and talk and help out if there's something going on, or just sit there while you do something and you're totally cool with that. And it is easy to be a single person in your house, and I really appreciate you guys.
Yeah, man.
Thanks for talking. It was fun.
Yeah.
Next time on the podcast. So you've lived together more than once.
This is round 3.
I talk with my friends Bethany, Mason, and Nicole about what might be the ultimate kind of third wheel relationship.
It is hard to be in relationship.
When single people live with married people.
Marriage, roommate. There is something to prioritizing any relationship that makes it different.
And also dying to myself, I'm able to actually give something.
It's okay to live in a way that is not completely convenient for myself. This podcast is made by humans. We get things wrong. We have blind spots. So we want to hear from you. What are your experiences? Is there something we missed that you'd like to hear about? I'm working on some bonus episodes to fill in the gaps and really want your feedback. So please email the show at professionalthirdwheelpodcast@gmail.com. Or even better, leave a voice message by calling 615-953-0360. Join us ordinary people in helping other ordinary people. The show is edited and produced by me, Kevin Morris. Music by The Universal Donor. Logo by Kyle Patterson. We're a part of the Honest Edge Media Network. Check us out at honestedgemedia.com. And because I'm so bad at self-promotion, please help me out by sharing, or maybe leave a review, preferably 5 stars. This really helps the show be found by others who might benefit from it. You'll find new episodes in your feed the first and third week of each month. So until next time. So I wanted to do an epilogue of sorts. I'll be honest, small groups with kids are just different. Noise levels are going to be a bit more competitive. Our small group spawned 4 new babies this summer. Jonathan and Liz are actually responsible for one of them, so we're learning how to be a small group with kids in real time. During this, I've watched my friends be really self-aware of when their kids make noise, whether that be fussing or happy sounds. And I feel like it's my responsibility as one without kids to continually reassure them that it's totally fine, because it is. We're so glad that they're there, and it's a joy having their babies around. But even when smiling, glances can feel judgmental to self-conscious parents. Which is a shame because that baby's actually flooding everyone with oxytocin. Can it be distracting? Maybe at times. But the room can be completely silent and my mind will go elsewhere. I guess I say all this so you'll heap an extra helping of encouragement on the new or existing parents in your small group or church services. They've got enough to worry about without wondering if they're a disturbance. And believe me, they need us to constantly refute that nagging fear to actually believe us. And if the trust is there and you're willing, maybe ask if you can take that child off their hands every once in a while. Something as simple as taking a babbly baby or chatty toddler into another room for a bit can be such a gift to parents, who might finally be able to give their full attention to the teaching or to unburdening themselves for a few minutes. My parent friends are always telling me how much they love having their friends involved with their kids. Small groups with many kids will often have 1 or 2 members be on kid duty in a separate space and rotate each week. If everyone stays in the same room and you have an idea of how you can entertain a talkative kiddo for a few moments while still participating in whatever's going on, jump in and give it a go. If nothing else, you buy the parent a few more minutes they don't feel like they have to remove their child and themselves from the group. Again, this podcast is all about creativity and relationships. You know your people. Go forth and discuss what will make them feel the most loved. Small groups are a place to do life together. What could be more a part of doing life than this?